Hey, Internet and beloved America. My name is Dee, and I'm streaming out of Humboldt County about Humboldt County to Humboldt County and anyone else who cares. And I am going through this study right now. We are only in the second chapter, so if you haven't been along yet, this is fine place to jump on in. I am doing something new. I am going to be doing pre-records for this class so as to not have any interruptions or distractions. I hope that that helps bring this content up a notch. I really am excited that anybody wants to learn along and hear about our history, our government, how it happened, and can we make it happen again? So that is why I'm streaming this study. I'm going to start off with a quiz from the last chapter, and it'll only take a minute to get through it. But here it is. Number 1, who is the man that discovered America's freedom formula? Give the year of his birth. Thomas Jefferson, 1743. 2, put these names in order of birth. Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, John Adams, and Madison. And first is Franklin, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Madison. 3, how many hours a day did Jefferson study during his school years? 12 to 14. 4, name 2 other things he did for diversion. He ran and played the violin. 5, who was Jefferson's law professor? George Wythe. 6, Jefferson's life changed when he heard Patrick Henry speak in the Virginia House of Burgesses against the Stamp Act. 7, an amazing thing happened during his interview to gain admittance to the bar. What was it? Well, Jefferson knew more than the questionnaires. 8, what difficulty did he have with Belinda Burwell? Asking her to marry him, and then she married his best friend. 9, who did he eventually marry? Martha Wells Skelton. 10, what happened to Thomas Jefferson's first library collection? It burned down, and his second collection is in the Library of Congress. 11, what document made Jefferson's name well known in America and England? The Summary View of the Rights of British Americans. 12, give 2 reasons why 1776 was a difficult year for Thomas Jefferson. He lost his daughter and his mother, and he was quite worried about his wife as well. She was very ill. 13, give 2 reasons why 1776 was a difficult year for the country. And we had, I guess it says, let's see, what do I have here? Lost Canada, 4,000 troops left, and the king disowned America. 14, Jefferson's big worry was that no state knew how to self-govern in freedom. 15, name 2 things Jefferson said Virginia had to get rid of in order to be free. Slavery, primogeniture, entailed estates, state church, tithing, tax. I don't know this word, primogeniture. I have to look that up. I'm sorry about that. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. But I'm not going to start over again like I did already once, 2, 3 times. Going live is a little bit easier because once you make a mistake, you don't necessarily start all over again. You just keep going. So that has been the challenge why I haven't wanted to do pre-records because I do end up starting all over a lot. I'm like, whoops, made a mistake. Start all over. I'm going to make mistakes. And I'm just going to keep going. I hope this is a lot shorter and more concise and more enjoyable for people that have been following along in this study. I'm sure you'll appreciate that I won't have distractions going on. So I read the first 10 pages of the Ancient Principles, Chapter 2, and we are going to wrap up this chapter now with the last 10 pages. So here we go. Lessons the founders learned from the People's Law under the Israelites. As we analyze the details of the administration of People's Law during the era of the ancient Israelites, we discover numerous principles of government that were not only identical to those of the Anglo-Saxons, but that are applicable to our own day. Here are some of the more obvious aspects of their culture after they were reorganized according to the system recommended by Jethro. First of all, they were set up as a commonwealth of free men. The whole emphasis of Israel's new system was reflected in the proclamation, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. This proclamation became part of the American heritage when it was emblazoned on what became known as the Liberty Bell. Whenever the Israelites fell into the temptation to have slaves or bondservants, they were reprimanded. Around 600 BC, a reprimand was given through Jeremiah. You have not hearkened unto me in proclaiming liberty, every one to his brother and every man to his neighbor. Behold, I proclaim a liberty for you, saith the Lord. 2, fundamental to the entire system of people's law was a strong commitment to a very basic code of solid morality. Similarly, the founders continually emphasized this aspect of constitutional government in a free society. As Benjamin Franklin said, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. John Adams was equally explicit. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Samuel Adams added a final warning. Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. 3, the Israelites under people's law were organized in small, manageable units where all of the adults had a vote and a voice. 4, there was major emphasis on strong local government. 5, they had a system of honest money based on gold and silver according to weight and a strict requirement of honest weights and measures. 6, the land was looked upon as a private stewardship of the people, not the government. 7, the rights of property were protected. 8, the rights of life and private liberty were protected. 9, all leaders were selected with the consent of a majority of the people. 10, all laws came into force only when approved by a majority of the people or their representatives. 11, accused persons were presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. Evidence had to be strong enough to remove any question of doubt. Borderline cases were decided in favor of the accused and left to the judgment of God. 12, the entire code of justice was based primarily on reparation to the victim rather than fines and punishments by the Commonwealth. The one crime for which no satisfaction could be given was first-degree murder. The penalty was death. The main thrust of government was from the people upward. Only in a time of temporary crisis was the thrust from the government down. The founders included this in the Constitution under the war powers. 14, the government was required to operate according to the principle of law, not the whims of men. 15, because this system expressed the will of the majority of the people, it allowed power to be transformed from one regime to another by peaceful means. Howard B. Rand, an American lawyer, reviewed these principles and wrote, when the time came for the United States of America to adopt a constitution, our forefathers modeled it after the perfect Israelite system of administration. All of this now leads us to Jefferson's second field of careful study, the Anglo-Saxons. The mystery of the Anglo-Saxons. During the 1700s, one of the most fascinating and popular studies in England and America was unraveling the mystery of the Anglo-Saxons. Even today, English historian Sharon Turner, who wrote his 3-volume classic In the Days of the Founders, is still considered a leading authority on these amazing people who came from around the Black Sea in the 1st century BC and spread all across Northern Europe. In fact, they were best organized, best governed people in their day. They not only conquered or intermarried with the royal families of every Northern European country, but they set out in their open boats to chase the Irish out of Iceland, discover Greenland, and even establish temporary settlements in what is now Canada. But the most important thing to Jefferson, Franklin, John Adams, and others who studied their culture was their institutes of constitutional government, which were almost identical with those of ancient Israel. The Anglo-Saxons first brought their culture to Britain around AD 450 when two brothers, Hengist and Horsa, were invited by the King of Kent to bring their relatives to southern Britain and fight off the king's enemies. The Anglo-Saxons were not only successful in this military venture, but they liked Britain so well they decided to stay. Before long, they had virtually taken over the island of Britain and changed its name to England, Anglo-England or England. Jefferson studied the Anglo-Saxons in their own language. As we have already pointed out, Thomas Jefferson became remarkably proficient in 5 languages. One of them was the language of his ancestors, the Anglo-Saxons. He learned this language so he could study their laws in their original tongue. They not only had the major elements of people's law, but they were organized and governed by principles similar to those of Moses. He made copies of the Anglo-Saxons' laws and sent some of them to friends along with his own translation. His admiration for these laws is expressed in his letter to Edmund Pendleton, dated August 13th, 1776, when he wrote, "Are we not better for what we have hitherto abolished of the feudal system? Has not every restitution of the ancient Saxon laws had happy effects? Is it not better now that we return at once to this happy system of our ancestors, the wisest and most perfect ever yet devised by the wit of man, as it stood before the 8th century?" Some interesting aspects of the Anglo-Saxon culture. Many have thought the Yinglings or Anglo-Saxons included a branch of ancient Israelites because they came from the territory of the Black Sea, where the 10 tribes disappeared, and because they preserved the same unique institutes of government as those which were given to the Israelites at Mount Sinai. But whether related or not, there is certainly irrefutable evidence of a cross-fertilization of laws and cultural values between these two peoples. Here are some examples. 1. The Anglo-Saxons considered themselves a commonwealth of free men. 2. They organized themselves into units identical to those of the Israelites. A. The head of 10 families was called a tithing man. B, the head of 50 families became an obscure office, but may have been a villeman or head of a village. C, the head of 100 families was called the 100 man. D, the head of 1,000 families was called the ealdorman, later shortened to earl. The territory occupied by 1,000 families was called a shire, and the administrative assistant to the earl was called the shire reeve. We pronounce it sheriff. 3, all laws as well as the election of leaders had to be by the common consent of the people. 4, authority granted to a chieftain in time of war was extremely limited and was taken away from him as soon as the emergency had passed. 5, their system of justice was based on payment of damages to the victim rather than calling it a crime against the whole people. When law books of both England and colonial America were crammed with bad procedures, unjust practices, and cruel punishments, the statutes of the Anglo-Saxons came to the founders like a breath of fresh air. Here were ancient principles which could be employed to the advantage of the founders as they developed their new successful formula. To better appreciate the perspective, we will pause to examine the Anglo-Saxon precepts more closely. Sharon Turner summarizes the substance of the Anglo-Saxon law as it existed up to the time of the Norman conquest in 1066. As we have noted, Thomas Jefferson saw that the laws of the Anglo-Saxons were beginning to erode after the 8th century. Nevertheless, a great many of the best features survived and were still in operation right up until the Norman conquest. By that time, many years of war had compelled the Anglo-Saxons to confederate together under a king. He was still an elected monarch, however, rather than a hereditary king. Furthermore, he was closely controlled by the Witan, the Anglo-Saxon parliament. But as with kings in all ages, the centralization of power was beginning to concentrate extensive authority by AD 1066. He was not only the chief executive of the nation, but played an essential role in the legislature. He received and expended all taxation and was even the center and source of authority for all jurisprudence. He was commander-in-chief of all the armies, and when the Witan was summoned, it was at his discretion. While it was in session, he presided over the proceedings. The full name of the Anglo-Saxon Parliament was the Witena Gemat, which is usually referred to by the shorter name of Witan. The members included representatives from each of the towns, regions, or clans, as well as those who had been honored by the king for valiant military service. It is included the thanes, major landowners, and militants or knights. Milites or knights. The highest orders of nobility, which were granted for distinguished military service, were not designed for an aristocracy, but were open to the lowest classes. These titles included the title of Ealdorman, Earl, Hold, Hertog, Earl, and Thang or Thane. These titles were personal honors and were not passed on to the nobleman's successors. Of course, land granted by the king for distinguished service was permanently retained by the recipient and could be transferred to his heirs. However, there was no feudal system of primogeniture, which required that the nobleman's estate be assigned to an oldest son. Any person holding land from the king was obligated to build castles and bridges and serve the king for a limited time in his military expeditions. The freemen. The foundation of the Anglo-Saxon society was the freemen. They looked upon the king as their sovereign and defender, but were subjects to no other master except those whom they chose to serve. The highest order of freemen was the milites, or knights. A freeman became a member of this order by the investment of the military belt. He then became part of a privileged class that lived on the lands of the nobility, but could not serve in the national army as a commanding officer unless appointed as such. Beginning a class of bondsmen by 1066. During the latest states of Anglo-Saxon history, there had developed substantial class of slaves, bondsmen, and others who were obligated to fulfill some degree of servility or compulsory employment. Nevertheless, the law protected them from abuse and provided certain regulations to promote their welfare and ultimate emancipation through good conduct. Property could not be taxed without the consent of the Witan. All freemen were required to attach themselves to a tithing, which was a unit of administration originally consisting of 10 families. Each member of a tithing had to put up a bond for his general good behavior and conduct himself according to certain regulations. Anglo-Saxon law required each group to be responsible for his members. Let's see how we're looking there. Good. Originally, reparation to the victim. Originally, a person found guilty of an offense was required to provide compensation only to the victim. However, the Confederation under a permanent king resulted in additional fines going to the sovereign to cover the expense of keeping the peace. A value was placed on each individual according to his place in the social structure. This was called his were. An additional value was placed on each individual to protect his peace and security. This was called a mund. Offenders were fined proportionate to the amount of injury inflicted on a person's life or limb, his were, or his peace and privacy, his mund. A high premium was placed on the personal liberty of each free subject, so long as he was not violating any law. Heavy penalties were imposed on those who unlawfully imprisoned or restrained a free man. A person accused of a crime was permitted to defend himself by producing a certain number of his neighbors who were willing to swear that it was their complete conviction that he was innocent. This procedure was intended to impress on each person the necessity of maintaining a reputation of good character in his neighborhood, so that in case of a false accusation, his neighbors would come to his defense. Even today, the use of character witness is a significant part of our judicial system. The jury system. The Anglo-Saxons were employed trial by jury, but there is no record of the time when it was first inaugurated. It may have been instituted anciently or introduced by the Danish colonists, who are known to have employed the jury system from remote antiquity. Property rights were held to be sacred, and strict rules were employed concerning tenure and the transfer of titles. Every man was required to honor the rights of others, just as he expected to have his own rights honored. Judges were placed under obligation to carefully evaluate each offense and make the penalty commensurate with the seriousness of the crime. All persons of means were emphatically enjoined to aid the poor, ameliorate the distress of widows and orphans, and treat strangers with kindness and fairness. The Witan, or Parliament, was under obligation to make certain that the laws of the land conformed with the revealed laws of God. Any which did not were abolished and renounced as being unconstitutional and void. The Witan was also under obligation to see that every man, whether rich or poor, was fully protected in his common rights and treated with equal solicitude and care. Social justice and the general welfare. It was a fundamental precept that all laws must be for the good of general welfare of the people, collectively and individually. Frequently, the Witan passed laws favorable to the emancipation of slaves, even though this was often done contrary to the wishes of those who held them in a state of involuntary servitude. A fundamental requirement of the law was that all persons who had been offended should have the opportunity to petition for redress. In fact, there were heavy penalties enacted against shiremen or judges who refused or neglected to hear the petitions of the aggrieved. The victim of an offense was not to avenge his injury personally until after legal justice had been sought. The natural liberty of each individual was only to be restricted by those laws which were for the social good of the whole people. To protect the life and liberty of all freemen, there was an established catalog of penalties for the loss of each limb or any other act of maiming or injuring to an individual. There were laws to prohibit fighting and personal violence, as well as laws to punish robbery and rapine, which the powerful and warlike members of society sometimes imposed on weaker or unsuspecting victims. There were heavy penalties for trespass, whether against a person's house or his private lands. Every landowner was required to make hedges and fences to keep his cattle from injuring his neighbor. The observance of Sunday as a day of rest from all worldly labor was strictly enforced. The law provided that there is a natural equality of man, which must not be violated by those in power. To protect the various levels of nobility and civic responsibility among the people, the punishment for offenses increased with the rank of the person offended. It was proposed that the higher the rank, the greater the offense against the welfare of the people whom he served. Channels of justice. Each dimension and class of people had a procedure for the protection of their rights through designated channels where redress could be sought. Each channel was kept distinct from interference by the others. Not only was the property and life of the individual protected by his character. Did I read something out of order? Wait a minute. It's members. I did read a book out of order. Well, we're rolling with it now. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. I got these pages. No, they're not out of order. I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry. Protected his character was as well. I'm just ahead in my book down here. So I'm sorry about that. Any slanderous words were subject to punishment. The rights of women received special protection under the law. Upon the death of a father, the mother received the custody and care of the children. Women were protected by law from violence and abuse or forced marriages. Parents were held responsible for any offense committed by their children against others. Any person convicted of perjury was thereafter disqualified as a witness. Every man was protected in his right to hunt in his own woods or fields. To the founders, these principles seemed far advanced in both spirit and context compared with those which prevailed in any country of their day, including England. As we indicated earlier, when Jefferson reflected on these ancient principles, he could not help asking the leader in the Virginia House of Delegates, is it not better now that we return at once into the happy system of our ancestors, the wisest and most perfect ever yet devised by the wit of men? Classical studies of the founders. It will be apparent from what we have seen thus far that collectively speaking, the minds of the founders were like a huge vacuum cleaner, sucking up knowledge of every sort from every available source. When it came to politics, the minds of the leading founders were as far-ranging and profound as any collection of advanced scholars in the field of political studies today. Their correspondence, speeches, and commentaries disclose a penetrating understanding of both ancient and modern writers. Often the founders read the classics in their own original language. They were familiar with Plato's Republic and his laws, with Aristotle's essays on politics, with the political philosophy of the Greek historian Polybius, with the great Roman defender of the republican principles Cicero, with the legal commentaries of Sir Edward Coke, with the essays and philosophy of Francis Bacon, with the essays of Richard Hooker, with the dark forebodings of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, with the more optimistic and challenging essays on civil government. By John Locke, with the animated spirit of the laws, by Baron Charles de Montesquieu of France, with the 3-volume work of Algernon Sidney, who was beheaded by Charles II in 1683, with the writings of David Hume, with the legal commentaries of Sir William Blackstone, and with the economic defense of the free market economy by Adam Smith, called The Wealth of Nations. Their founders knew their classics. They also knew their history, biblical, Greek, Roman, European, and American. From all these valuable sources, they sorted out what they considered to be the best and most enduring for the prosperity and peace of a free people under a republican system of self-government. There's a little picture of a warrior with a shield and a spear. Jefferson called the governmental system practiced by the Anglo-Saxons and the Israelites the wisest and most perfect ever yet devised by the wit of men. There's a lot of good photos and drawings in there. If you were just listening, you can go back and you can kind of see some of the things that are there. But that is the study for today. 27 minutes. Not bad, getting it under 30 minutes. I hope that you will follow along with me for the rest of this course. This is a thick book. We're only in chapter 2. And I have done this before. Again, like I said, with the 5,000-year leap, I did these together, and I did the 5,000-year leap by itself, which I highly recommend. That was my favorite. Thank you, guys. I hope you have a wonderful Easter Sunday. If you celebrate the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, peace. We'll see you on the next one.